So today we'll be discussing data centers, pretty much all of the information that you need to know about data centers, cloud computing, and security. So there are three primary objectives of our presentation today. First, I would like you to learn about the role of data centers in providing cloud computing services. So how are they connected to cloud? Why are they used for cloud? We'll also be discussing the importance of cloud computing for businesses and for individuals. The last thing that I'm hoping that we will discuss or that we will learn today is the different parts of security and its importance in protecting all of the digital assets that are contained in data centers. So there are three big topics that we will be discussing today. The first one that we're going to focus on here is data centers. So we're going to discuss what makes up a data center, who uses data centers, why are data centers important, and we're going to end on the example of Loudoun County. After discussing data centers, we are going to move on to cloud computing. We'll discuss what cloud computing is, who uses cloud computing, why it is important, and then we'll also talk about some of the biggest examples of cloud services. We will end by discussing security. We'll break down the protective measures, both physical and technological, that are provided in a data center. We will discuss why they are important, and we will end on the example of Google Cloud, its data center, and how it is protected. So let's begin by discussing data centers. What is a data center? Essentially, all of the data that is on the internet has to be stored somewhere. So we take all of this data and we store it on a physical device. Then we take all of these physical devices and we store them in buildings called data centers. So there's a bunch of different equipment that is located in a data center. Some of it includes different servers, you have storage, you have backup devices, you have networking equipment, and all of this together is used to run, deliver, store, and manage any applications and services of any of the companies that are using it. So they are used by a bunch of different businesses to store a large amount of data. Some of the most prominent examples we have are data centers are used to help power machine learning and artificial intelligence. Both of these learn by being given a bunch of different data to process. So data centers play a huge role in helping to power machine learning and AI. Another big use of data centers is storage and backup in the case of emergencies or in case of power outages or any of that stuff. It's also used in e-commerce transactions. It's used by gaming platforms and communities. And there's also private cloud apps, in-house productivity apps that are stored in data centers. So why are data centers important? There are a lot of different things that show the importance of data centers. First of all, one of the primary reasons that it's important to store data in a data center is that there is backup power supplies in the form of generators for power outages. So there's backup power supplies, there's backup cooling systems to make sure that your data is protected even if there is some sort of outage. Also, it is super important for recovery in the case of major disasters. There is multiple copies of the data, one that's physical, that is stored in these data centers that ensures that any of this data can be recovered if there is a major disaster. Also, these facilities have state-of-the-art cooling systems, which help make sure that any of the hardware in the building is at the adequate temperature to help prolong how long it is around, right? It helps prolong the life of all of the digital equipment that is within it. Also, making sure that you use a data center has high optimization rates for all of the users that are using any of the data or the cloud that is for that data center. It provides a secure location that's going to help protect any of the sensitive information behind a ton of security, which we'll be discussing shortly. Overall, data centers are extremely important because they allow cloud services to be reliable and efficient for all of the users that use it, both companies and individuals. Now, our best example of data centers is Loudoun County. So Loudoun County is labeled as a data center alley as it contains the largest concentration of data centers in the world. I did show a picture here to the left of Data Center Alley, and I have left a link here where you can have a virtual tour of Data Center Alley to see all of the things that it contains, as it contains data from more than 3,500 different technology companies in this one location. And that is huge, but also it is continuing to grow as it is continuing to expand and construct more data centers pretty much daily for the last 14 years. And a little fun fact that I found about Loudoun County is that it handles up to 70% of email traffic every single day. So if you send an email today, there's a 70% chance that it went through Loudoun County in one of the data centers. Now, moving on from data centers, let's talk a second about the cloud. So we've talked about how data centers are the ones that store all of this data from cloud. So let's take a second and talk about what cloud is. So this is an online system for all of the activities that you are doing on the internet. And this cloud allows you to be able to access things from a lot of different places. So if you open an assignment or you open a document on one computer, maybe at work, you can still access that same document from your home as long as you log in with the same password in the same place. Clouds are used by a ton of different companies. The ones that I found to be the most prevalent were healthcare, financial services, game makers use them, oil uses them, other services as well use cloud. And it is very important for both companies and individuals to use cloud in their everyday life. For companies, cloud helps reduce the cost of having or maintaining IT infrastructure. So, allowing cloud to be stored in a data center, maybe not one owned by that specific company, is going to decrease the amount of costs the company has for maintaining any of that physical equipment to store the data or even having it in the first place. For users, having the cloud increases the mobility of data. So you can kind of work wherever you want to work as long as you have access to the internet due to the cloud. It also increases the speed of a lot of different applications and resources. So having the cloud, this is a benefit for both the company and for the individual because of the efficiency of data centers, and the backups allows for the speed of the applications to be very high. Also, any updates to devices or any new pieces of data that the developers want to release, it's a lot easier to release it due to the cloud. And finally, for the companies, it does decrease your energy. It could increase your energy efficiency by having a bunch of different companies use the same data center. So they all can have their own cloud, but if they use the same data center, that is going to cut back on the amount of energy that is being used or the energy that is being used by any of the companies, because all of them do not have their own IT infrastructure. They're all using the same data center. Now, some of the biggest examples I found of cloud computing that I wanted to just briefly mention that you should know of, Apple iCloud is a big one. That was one of the most prevalent ones that I found for any Apple devices that you may have, including your iPhone. Amazon Web Services is the biggest cloud company that there currently is, and this is very prevalent as a lot of us have shopped on Amazon in the past. Dropbox is another one that I found, as well as Microsoft Azure, and that is where you would house a lot of your Microsoft Teams, your documents, your Excel. Any of those are an example of Microsoft Azure, which is a cloud computing big example. Now let's dive into the security of data centers. Why should we store our data in a data center instead of in-house? There's a ton of measures that are put in place for a data center to help increase the security. So some of the physical measures that you have, first, when you're even picking the location, a lot of our data centers are located strategically, and that is because they don't want to be in a place where they're more likely to be hit by a natural disaster like an earthquake. They don't want to be in a place where it's more likely for them to flood. So it's very important to build a data center above any floodplains. Also, when building It is important to use thick concrete walls. This is to help avoid any disasters from occurring, like if someone were to build the wall, or if they were able to infiltrate. It is very important to have thick concrete walls to make sure the foundation is stable. And finally, a lot of our security buildings for data centers have additional high fencing surrounding the entire property. This is to help, again, stop anyone from entering that should not be. And even with that high fencing, a lot of it is smart fencing, which makes sure that anyone in the building is aware of what's going on with that. Make sure you can't climb it. Make sure that if someone's touching it, that you are aware. Along with that, there is security that is surrounding the building and doing rounds around the building, either in vehicles or on foot, to make sure that the building is secure. There are also technology measures that are put in place. So there's firewalls, next generation firewalls. There is prevention and detection systems, two-factor authentication for anything that is being put in that data center. And the biggest one here is surveillance. So a lot of data centers, pretty much 24/7, have surveillance monitoring systems that are monitoring every single square foot of that place. And also, another key aspect of security is kind of redundancy. So having multiple elements or multiple things that are supporting the same system. So for example, surveillance monitoring systems, they have cameras that are overlapping to make sure that the same area is being covered by multiple different angles, by multiple different cameras, just in case something happens to the first one. Also, there is redundancy in the power system. There is redundancy in the cooling systems to make sure that our data is pretty secure at all times. Just in case something happens to the first system, there is a backup in place to make sure that nothing happens to the data. Now, if you were to enter a data center, there is additional security measures that you will have to go through to get to different levels of that data center. So there is a thorough check-in process where you have to provide some proof of identity, whether that's an ID, whether that's a passport. You have to prove who you are. Also, a lot of places require fingerprinting to make sure that you are who you say you are. They will be providing you with ID badges and badge key cards to get to different parts of the facility. And that key card would not work on every location, only the ones that you are allowed to be in when you are there. There's also retina and or facial scans that you could undergo as you enter the facility or different parts of the facility to make sure that you are where you need to be. Finally, this is very important because companies have to trust the data center they store their data in. And this is important because it helps protect the information of the individuals in the company as well as the ones they serve. So if we didn't have security, a lot of data centers would not be reliable to use for any company with a cloud. So our best example, or the one that I did a virtual tour of here, is our Google data center. So there is 6 different layers of security that were discussed in one of the videos that I watched. Your first layer is your property boundaries with fencing. So the actual boundaries of the property were completely surrounded by fencing. And this fencing is smart fencing. So it was anti-climb, which means no one can really climb on it. And also there are alerts to individuals within the building if there is touching of the fence. So the second layer you have here is your entrance gate. So there is someone constantly manning the entrance gate at all times for this data center. And along with that, there is guard patrols surrounding the entire facility, both vehicles and on foot. And back to the redundancy here for a second, there is overlapping cameras surrounding the entire property, as well as that entrance gate with overlapping cameras that have night vision. So overlapping cameras to make sure if one is faulty for whatever reason, we still can see what is going on, and night vision so that they can see as well in the night as they can during the day. Layer 3, so this is when you actually can enter the building. You have to have an ID to come into the building, and you have to complete an iris scan before you're even allowed into the building. And also, one safety measure that is a protocol for Google data is that there's only one individual that is allowed into the building at a time. So you can only go into the building if you're with somebody. You each have to go in one at a time. You have to go through the thorough check-in process, have your iris scan before the other one's allowed in. Your fourth layer here is kind of your surveillance, or who is monitoring that data center at all times. And this is something that is going on pretty much 24/7. So there is always going to be someone there in that building that is watching the doors, that's watching the cameras, that is pretty much pulling up anything that is scanned, including the badges, including your iris that is scanned, to make sure that you are where you're supposed to be and that there's no anomalies. Layer 5. So this is kind of where there's a lot of restricted access. There is not a lot of individuals that are allowed into certain locations within Google. Pretty much if you are not an engineer or a technician, you are not going to get there. And they are only allowed in to help repair or upgrade any equipment with scheduling. And lastly, our last layer of security here is kind of our layer 6. And this is pretty much only available for technicians that are accessing the hardware to destroy it. And they only can destroy it when it is no longer necessary. Finally, one last piece of security for Google is that every single individual that is going in or out of the building has to go through a metal detector. Even if you are an employee there and you go there every day, you are going through a metal detector as you leave the building to make sure that none of the data on any physical device is leaving the premises. Now, why should you care? There's a lot of benefits for data centers and the cloud. So our biggest benefit is obviously flexibility. You have access to resources in multiple different locations as long as you have internet access. So you can access things from home, you can access things from work that you might not have saved previously in those locations. Another big benefit is that cloud increases your collaboration with other individuals. So there's a bunch of different apps. You have Google apps like Google Docs, Google Slides, where you can actually collaborate a lot with your peers. You can be working on the same thing, even if you're in different locations, whether that's in different classrooms or maybe even different states. It also is very efficient, as you can increase your efficiency using cloud, as they're less likely to go down. They run very fast. There's a little downtime. And also backup systems in the data center can help make sure that nothing is lost or nothing disappears. Finally, increased productivity. You are more likely to have access to a lot more resources that you wouldn't have with the cloud. So overall, it is extremely important to be aware of our cloud services, as they are a backbone in communication and in activities in companies and with other individuals. They are becoming a lot more prevalent, and they are still being built. Our data centers are still being built to host these cloud services. And is becoming very important, and it's the way that a lot of communities communicate with each other and with companies to get what they need. Thank you for listening to my presentation. If you have any questions or concerns, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Here are some of the references that I had for this presentation.